Okay, this pattern is going to be a tube fly clouser. It's going to be tied exactly the same way you would tie a normal clouser, although we're going to tie it using a tube fly. And advantages of a tube fly is you can basically carry one fly and have different size hooks for different species of fish you may be fishing for. For example, if you're out in the ocean fishing for maybe bigger stripers, you can use a larger hook such as a 2-aught or 3-aught hook. You can use the same fly and replace the hook with maybe a size 2 hook and then go inside and fish for speckled trout or puppy drum, or even for false albacore using a smaller size hook than you would normally perhaps use for a clouser for the bigger fish. So there are some advantages to having a tube fly. They are just as durable, just as effective. They fish the same way as a clouser tied on a regular hook, but you do have that advantage of being able to switch your hooks as you are fishing. So what we're going to do is there are only a few things you need differently to be able to tie a tube fly, and one thing that makes it really easy is this HMH tube fly tool, and basically it has a plate and it can fit into any vise jaw basically. It has a pin. They also come with a version that has mandrels in it that are tapered, so you can use different size tubes and metal tubing and whatnot. And then one thing I like about this compared to some of the other tube fly tools is that there's a ring right here where the pin goes in, where you can actually put your tube in there and lock it down so that your tube doesn't rotate on you while you're tying. And that's one reason I really like this particular tube fly holder compared to others. So basically what we're going to do, you can make your own tube flies, or tubes for tube flies, by the way. Is take a Q-tip with the plastic core. Just snip off the cotton ends and you have a tube for a tube fly. It's not going to be a rigid tube. It's a rather flimsy tube, but it works just fine. One thing that you might want to do is take a lighter and flare the end of it. So you can see that little knob on here now. And that knob will just help to keep the thread from falling off as you are tying the fly. So, and you can also get tubes that are pre-manufactured. I like these HMH tubes because these particular ones are not rigid, but they do have a version out that are rigid tubes, and they're really hard. They also have metal tubes. They have some of these that are made out of aluminum. They're all different kinds of tubes and tube makers of them. You can also go to the hardware store and pick out things there that work just fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this pin and we're going to insert the pin through your tube. And this particular vise has three different size pins, 2 pins, and so you can use the smaller pin for smaller tubes, use this one for larger tubes. So basically what I'm going to do is lift that ring up, and I'm going to slide the whole tube through there. I'm going to leave enough hanging out as if the hook were in the vise here and then the point of the hook were up here. And then I'm going to tighten this down. Now once I do that, this tube won't roll around on me. It's now held in place fairly tight, and I can easily tie the dumbbell and the rest of the fly without the tube rolling around. It's a little harder to tie it if you can't secure it that way, but there certainly are other ways you can secure it too. This is just a nice simple way, and the tool's not expensive. It's about probably between $15 to $20 depending on where you find it. So I'm going to attach the clouser eye, or the dumbbell eye, as you would a clouser. I'm going to do my figure 8 wraps. And I'm using pretty good tension here, because I actually want this thread to dig into the tube a little bit, so that this will hold the eye nice and tight onto the tube. Okay, once that's on there, you can take a little bit of Zap-A-Gap. Just put a drop on there, don't put too much. Just to protect your thread wraps, and again, really lock that to the tube. You don't want this sliding around and changing, distorting the whole fly as it turns once it's tied. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, take my white bucktail, and I'm going to tie the belly of the fly. So at this point, I'm not worried about junction tubing. I'm not worried about how long this tube is going to be toward the rear end. I'm going to adjust that later. I'm going to tie the fly first, and then I'll cut this tubing as short as I think I want it, and then I'll put the junction tubing on after that. And then I'll be able to control the size of everything there. So right now I'm just really tying the fly to the size that I want the fly to be. Okay, so I got my bucktail. I'm going to tie that on. Nice tight wraps. Jump behind the eye. A couple wraps. So as you can see, I have this on there. I have a fly that's about 4 inches long. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to change my thread. I wanted the white flat waxed mono on to begin with because I can really use a lot of pressure to hold the eye in place and wrap that bucktail in. But now I'm going to clear thread because when I switch to the top colors, I want the head of the fly to remain the same color of the fly. I kind of don't really like the head to end up being a different color unless I do change to maybe a red or green or something like that. But I like it to try to somewhat match the fly as I go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of crystal flash, and any flash is fine at this point. I also like the Mirage Flashaboo for this. And I'm going to take about, probably have about 6 strands there. And I'm going to tie it on. Make one wrap behind. So it lays on top of the hook. And I'll fine tune it later as far as the length. But I just kind of get it out of the way there. Okay, then I take just a little bit of pink. This just kind of adds the color, gives a little more definition to maybe a lateral line. It also will help if you have a large tube. With the Clouser, the hair really won't necessarily go around the tube. So what I do with this hair is I tie it flat to the top, and then I will let it wrap around the sides just a little bit to kind of fill in that space that would be there for the tube. So what I do is, again, I start it in the front, I put it on, and then for Clouser, when I tie normally, I would just leave that up just like the next step for the wing. But what I do is I just take one wrap behind the eye and come back in the front, and that's a loose wrap. But I'm letting the hair of the bucktail kind of wrap around that hook a little bit, so it ends up filling in that space. Okay, and then the last step is you're going to take your top color, your gray in this case, and again, the colors are up to you. You can use any color combination you want. Okay. Okay, so get that on there. And again, if you want, you can put just a drop of Zap-A-Gap or head cement just to protect the wraps. I normally don't do that with a regular hook, but I will do it on these flies because I don't want the thread to jump off the tubing in the front. So this will just lock it down even better. I trust my wraps, and with this nylon thread, I do 2 sets of whip finishes. And then I pull that tight to lock it in and cut it off. Now that's the tying steps of the fly. So you can release your pin, pull that out. You remove the pin from the fly. Okay, then you have your Clouser Minnow. Now, couple things. Obviously, you don't have a hook on here. So what I'm going to do is 2 things. First of all, the tube, as I had already mentioned, I left it long. And you can leave it long if you want the hook to end up being way back here, particularly if you're tying a big fly or a really long fly. You can leave the tube longer, and that'll bring your hook back longer, so you end up having a long shank hook without necessarily having to tie the fly on the whole hook. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a good part of that tubing. So the tubing now ends right here. So when I put my hook in, the hook's going to come out to about here. If I use a short shank hook, I actually like those better for the tube flies. The eye of the hook, when you stick the junction tubing on here, and that will be important for this fly, and I'll explain that in a minute. That will be something that will transition from the fly to the hook. Now, you can, and if you have a perfectly symmetrical fly, everything is even around all sides, you don't need anything else. You can just put the hook on. This fly will tend to rotate around that, but that's okay because it's symmetrical. But obviously this, we want the belly to be down, we want the top to be up. So it's important that we put a piece of junction tubing on there. And all the junction tubing is a piece of really flexible tubing, hose, like aquarium hose. This one is 1/4 inch inner diameter. And this came with the kit, the HMH kit, but it's the same diameter, for example, if you use the Q-tip. You just have to find the tubing. But what you're going to do is basically just slide that piece of tubing onto that little stub that you left there, and then you can put the Zap-A-Gap head cement on there to lock this in place, and before all that they used to just tie it in place when they tied the fly. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off, kind of imagining enough room so that the eye of the hook will slide inside the flexor tube up to the hard tube. So now when I rig it, I'll be able to take the hook, I'll be able to fish the line through the tubing, tie the hook on, and then slide it back through with the hook resting inside of this tubing, and I can turn the hook either up or down depending on what I want it to do. So I'll demonstrate pretty much right now what you have to do as far as rigging this. Rigging the tube fly is very easy. I'm going to take my leader, in this case 20-pound monofilament, and you just slide it right through the tube all the way out the other end. Alright, so then on the other end, when you pull it out, you're going to tie your hook on. You can use a cinch knot as used here, you can SNELL it, you can really use whatever knot you prefer, that's fine. The knot's going to go inside the tube, and then the eye of the hook is going to sit inside the nesting tube here. So what you're going to do is you just kind of pull the hook up, and then you push it into the tube. Okay, and you can orient the hook however you would like to. You can have it facing up, you can have it facing down. It doesn't matter. For the Clouser Minnow, obviously you want the hook riding up generally, and that's it. You just fish it like you would a regular Clouser. The other nice thing about tube flies, fish comes along, takes the fly, You get the fish up to the boat or on the beach or however you're fishing. You can remove the fly, just pull it out of the tube, and you can take the hook out of the fish's mouth. Okay, so it makes it easy hook removal, and then all you have to do is just slide the fly back down the tube on the leader, put the hook back in, and you're ready to go for the next fish. Fish takes it, you can pop it off. And sometimes this fly will come off during the fight anyway, and that's fine. It gets out of the way, so you may end up having to cut a hook out of a fish where he really swallows it deep, and you don't want to hurt the fish anymore, so you cut the hook out, but you still have the fly. Whereas normally you would have to cut the whole fly off to get it out. So you just carry some extra hooks with you. You just tie a hook on, put the fly, attach it through that junction tubing, and you're ready to go.